The air tasted of ash and blood. Guardsman Marcus Varn pressed his back against the corroded metal wall of the underhive corridor, his lasgun clutched tight against his chest. The rhythmic thudding of 1,000 chitinous legs echoed through the darkness beyond, growing louder with each passing second. He could hear them coming. The Tyranids had found their scent. 3 days ago, Hive Fleet Devourer had emerged from the warp at the edge of the Kethara system. The astropaths had screamed themselves to death, trying to send warnings across the sector, their minds shattered by the psychic shadow of the great Devourer. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. The evacuation had begun immediately. Now, as Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand, he wondered if any of them would live to see the Emperor's light again. Behind him, huddled in the makeshift shelter of overturned cargo containers and twisted metal beams, 43 civilians waited in terrified silence. Families, mostly. Children who clutched threadbare toys and stared with wide, haunted eyes. Mothers who held their babies close, whispering prayers to the Emperor. Old men who had survived decades in the Underhive's toxic atmosphere, only to face an end more horrible than anything they had ever imagined. They were his responsibility now. When the Tyranid spores had begun raining down across Kethara Prime's surface like deadly snow, when the bioships had descended through the atmosphere trailing acidic clouds, when the screaming had begun in the upper hives, Marcus had been assigned to Evacuation Detail 7. His orders were simple. Guide civilian groups through the underhive tunnels to Transport Bay Theta, where the last evacuation ships waited to carry survivors to safety among the stars. Simple orders. But nothing was ever simple. The first group had been easy. Mostly young adults, fit and capable of moving quickly through the maze of service tunnels and maintenance shafts that honeycombed the lower levels of Hive Kethara. They had reached the transport bay within 6 hours, loaded onto a bulk freighter, and lifted off into the void before the Tyranid advance elements had penetrated the Hive's outer defenses. The second group had been harder. Elderly citizens and injured workers from the manufactorums. It had taken 12 hours to navigate the treacherous path through collapsed tunnels and past the toxic waste pools that bubbled in the deepest sections of the underhive. But they had made it. Marcus had watched their transport ship disappear into the ash-clouded sky with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was his third group. His final group, according to Vox operator Thet's last transmission before the communications array had gone dead. After this, there would be no more evacuation ships. The Navy was pulling back to the outer system, preparing for a fighting withdrawal that would buy time for other worlds to prepare their defenses. Marcus checked his chronometer. They had been moving for 18 hours, stopping only when the children could walk no further or when the skittering sounds in the darkness grew too close. The transport bay was still 8 kilometers away through a labyrinth of tunnels that grew more dangerous with each passing hour. And now the Tyranids had their scent. He could smell them too. A nauseating combination of organic decay and alien musk that seemed to cling to the recycled air like death. The bioorganisms that made up the Tyranid swarms carried that stench with them wherever they went, marking their territory like predators claiming their hunting grounds. A child began to cry. A little girl with blonde hair matted by dust and fear, no more than 6 years old. Her mother, a woman named Vera who had lost her husband in the first wave of attacks, pulled the child close and whispered desperate reassurances. "It's okay, Lyanna. The Guardsman will keep us safe. The Emperor protects." Marcus felt the weight of their faith like a physical burden. He was just one man with a lasgun. Against what was coming, he might as well be armed with harsh language and good intentions. But he was a guardsman of the Astra Militarum. He had sworn an oath to the Emperor of mankind, and that oath meant something even here in the poisoned depths of the underhive, even with alien death closing in from all sides. He activated his microbead Vox unit, hoping against hope that someone was still listening. "This is Guardsman Varn, Evacuation Detail 7. Do you copy?" "Over." Static filled his earpiece. Then faintly, a voice emerged from the electronic snow. "Varn, this is Sergeant Thorpe, 4th Platoon. What's your status?" "Over." Relief flooded through Marcus's chest. Thorpe was a good soldier. a veteran of the Mordian Gate campaign who had served with distinction for over 15 years. If anyone could help them reach the transport bay, it was him. "Sergeant, I have 43 civilians, including 16 children. We're approximately 8 kilometers from Transport Bay Theta, but we have contact. Repeat, we have Tyranid contact. Unknown numbers moving through the tunnel system. Request immediate support. Over." The pause stretched for long seconds. When Thorpe's voice came back, it was heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "Negative, Varn. 4th Platoon is engaged with a Carnifex brood in Sector 7 Alpha. 3rd Platoon was over 6 hours ago. You're on your own, Trooper. Get those civilians to the transport bay by any means necessary. That's a direct order. Over and out." The Vox unit went dead. Marcus stared at it for a moment, then clipped it back to his belt. "On your own." In the Imperial Guard, those 3 words usually meant the same thing as a death sentence. He turned to face the civilians. Their eyes were fixed on him with desperate hope, waiting for him to tell them that help was coming, that everything would be all right, that the Emperor's servants would deliver them from this nightmare. Marcus Varn had never been good at lying. "Listen to me," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the cramped space. "We're going to move fast, and we're going to move quiet. Stay close, stay together, and do exactly what I tell you. No questions, no hesitation. Our lives depend on it." Vera clutched her daughter tighter. "What about the other soldiers? Aren't they coming to help us?" "The other soldiers are fighting their own battles," Marcus replied. "Right now, I'm all you've got, but I promise you this, I will get you to that transport bay. I will get you off this world. On my oath as a servant of the Emperor, I swear it." The words felt like lead in his mouth, but they had to be said. These people needed hope, even if it was false hope. Without it, they would simply lie down and wait to die. Marcus shouldered his pack and checked his equipment one final time. 3 frag grenades, 2 crack grenades, a combat knife, and his trusty lasgun with 3 full power cells. Standard equipment for a standard guardsman facing a standard enemy. There was nothing standard about the Tyranids, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, they were waiting. Marcus led the group out of their hiding place and into the main tunnel. The corridor stretched away into blackness, illuminated only by the dim glow of emergency lighting strips that flickered and sparked with electrical failures. The air was thick with industrial pollutants, and the acrid smoke of burning promethium that drifted down from the battles raging in the upper levels of the hive. They moved in single file, the adults helping the children navigate the uneven floor and the scattered debris that littered their path. Marcus walked point, his lasgun raised and ready, every sense straining for the first sign of contact with the enemy. The tunnel branched ahead, splitting into 3 separate passages that led deeper into the Underhive's maze. Marcus consulted his map slate, trying to calculate the fastest route to the transport bay while avoiding the main thoroughfares where Tyranid advance elements were most likely to be moving. The left passage led through the old water treatment facility. Faster, but the machinery would provide cover for ambush predators. The center passage followed the main power conduit, well lit, but also well traveled by the enemy forces. The right passage wound through a series of abandoned hab blocks, slower, but offering multiple fallback positions if they were pursued. Marcus was still considering their options when he began to hear the distinctive chittering call of a gene-stealer pack on the hunt. It came from the left passage, echoing off the metal walls like the clicking of 1,000 mechanical insects. Then it was answered from the center passage, and then from the right. They were surrounded. "Back!" Marcus whispered urgently, gesturing for the civilians to retreat. "Everyone back to the junction, now." But it was too late. From the darkness of the left passage emerged the nightmare shapes of the Tyranid vanguard organisms. Gene-stealers moved with terrible speed. Their elongated skulls housed alien minds devoted to a single purpose: kill, consume, evolve. The first gene-stealer spotted the group and let out a piercing shriek that was immediately answered by its packmates. Within seconds, more of the creatures were pouring from all 3 passages. Marcus opened fire without hesitation. His lasgun spat bolts of energy that seared through the alien flesh, dropping the lead gene-stealer in a smoking heap. But for every creature that fell, two more took its place. "Run!" he shouted over the whine of weapons fire. "Back the way we came! Move!" The civilians scattered in panic, parents grabbing children and stumbling through the debris-strewn tunnel. Marcus laid down covering fire, his lasgun heating dangerously as he poured shot after shot into the advancing swarm. The narrow confines of the tunnel worked in his favor, creating a choke point that forced the Gene Stealers to attack in a concentrated group rather than using their superior numbers to flank and surround. A Gene Stealer leaped over the bodies of its fallen packmates, covering 10 meters in a single bound. Marcus dived aside as the creature's talons scraped gouges in the metal floor where he had been standing. He came up firing, his Lars bolt taking the alien in the center of its grotesque skull and dropping it in a twitching heap. But there were more behind it. Marcus fell back, firing and moving, using every scrap of cover the tunnel provided. His first power cell was almost depleted, the weapon's output dropping as the energy reserves ran low. He ejected the spent cell and slammed in a fresh one, never taking his eyes off the advancing swarm. The civilians had reached the junction and were fleeing down the tunnel they had originally come from. Good. That would buy them time, maybe enough time to find another route to the transport bay. Marcus began his own fighting withdrawal, pausing only to trigger one of his frag grenades and roll it back toward the Gene Stealer pack. The explosion lit up the tunnel like a miniature star, sending shrapnel ricocheting off the walls and ceiling. 3 Gene Stealers were caught in the blast, their alien blood painting the corridor in steaming patterns of purple and black. But the survivors simply stepped over their fallen comrades and continued the pursuit. Marcus turned and ran. The next hour was a nightmare of desperate flight through the Underhive's twisted passages. The Tyranids herded them like prey animals, cutting off escape routes and forcing the group deeper into the most dangerous sections of the lower levels. Here, the air was barely breathable, thick with toxic fumes that burned the lungs and made every breath an effort. The lighting was sporadic, casting long shadows that could hide a dozen enemies. But Marcus knew these tunnels. He had spent 3 months on patrol duty in the Underhives before being assigned to evacuation detail, learning every shortcut and secret passage in the maze of service corridors and maintenance shafts. He used that knowledge now, leading the civilians through forgotten access tunnels and emergency routes. They were making progress toward the transport bay, but slowly. It was at the 4th ambush that Marcus realized they were not going to make it. Not all of them. The attack came as they were crossing a wide maintenance chamber filled with massive air recycling units that hummed and wheezed with mechanical effort. The Gene Stealers dropped from concealed positions in the ceiling. Marcus saw a father named Yorick trying to shield his twin sons from a Gene Stealer's talons. The man went down screaming, his blood spraying across the chamber floor as alien claws opened his chest to the bone. The children's cries were cut short as the creature turned its attention to easier prey. Red rage filled Marcus's vision. He emptied his remaining power cell into the aliens, his Lars bolts burning through carapace and flesh. 1 Gene Stealer remained, and it was closing in on the civilians. He drew his combat knife and charged. The blade was sharp, its edge maintained meticulously. Yet it barely punched through Gene Stealer exoskeleton, severing its thick spine. Fighting Gene Stealers in close combat was suicide for anyone who was not a space marine, and Marcus was definitely not a space marine. Its death spasm caused its talons to rake across his left shoulder, opening his flak armor and the flesh beneath. Another caught him across the ribs. When the last Gene Stealer fell, Marcus counted the cost. 7 civilians dead, including Jorik and his sons. 2 others wounded, 1 seriously. The group was down to 36 souls, and they still had 6 kilometers to cover before reaching the transport bay. Vera was treating the wounded with supplies from Marcus's medkit, her hands steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Her daughter Lyanna sat beside the bodies of the dead children, her young mind unable to process what she had witnessed. "We can't keep this up," said an elderly man named Caius, his voice hollow with despair. "They're picking us off one by one. We should find somewhere to hide, wait for rescue." "There is no rescue," Marcus replied quietly, reloading his lasgun with his final power cell. The evacuation ships are leaving in 4 hours. If we're not on one of them, we're dead. All of us. Then we're dead anyway, another civilian said. Look at us. Half of us can barely walk, the other half are too scared to think straight. You're one man against an entire alien swarm. This is hopeless. Marcus studied the faces around him. He saw fear there, yes, but also determination. These were people who had lived their entire lives in the Underhive, who had survived gang wars and toxic spills and industrial accidents that would have killed softer citizens from the upper spires. They were tougher than they looked. Maybe, he said finally, but we're going to try anyway. There's no other choice. We fight, we survive, we protect those who can't protect themselves, and we never, ever give up. He activated his microbead again, hoping for another miracle. This time he got one. All Imperial forces, this is Captain Mordanis, Kethara PDF. We have established a defensive perimeter around Transport Bay Theta. Any evacuation details still en route, be advised. You have 3 hours before final departure. Repeat, 3 hours. After that, you're on your own. Over. Marcus responded immediately. Captain Mordanis, this is Guardsman Varn, evacuation detail 7. I have 36 civilians, approximately 6 kilometers from your position. We are under heavy pursuit by Tyranid forces. Request fire support and extraction. Over. Varn, this is Mordanis. Negative on extraction. We don't have the resources. But I can give you something else. Follow Tunnel Complex 7-4 Alpha to intersection Theta 9, then take maintenance shaft Epsilon 3 to the old water processing plant. From there, you'll have a clear run to the transport bay through the loading docks. But be advised, that route takes you through the outer perimeter. You'll be in contested territory. Over. Marcus checked his map slate, tracing the route the captain had described. It was longer than the direct path, but it would keep them away from the main Tyranid advance until the very end. It might work. Understood, Captain. What about the contested territory? Over. I've got a heavy weapons team positioned at checkpoint Delta 7. They'll provide covering fire for your final approach, but you'll have to make it to their position first. After that, it's a straight sprint to the transport bay. Over. Marcus looked at the exhausted civilians, at the wounded, and the children, and the elderly. 3 hours to cover 6 kilometers through hostile territory with minimal equipment and no backup. It should have been impossible, but he had made a promise. Affirmative, Captain. We'll be there. Varn out. The next phase of their journey took them deeper into the Underhive, pushing the pace, driving the group forward even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. They found the water processing plant exactly where Captain Mordanis had said it would be. A vast chamber filled with massive filtration units and chemical treatment tanks that had been abandoned decades ago, when the plant's output could no longer keep pace with the hive's growing population. The facility was dark and silent, but it offered something more valuable than safety: concealment. Marcus called a halt, allowing the civilians to rest while he scouted ahead. The loading docks were just beyond the plant's eastern exit, and from there it was less than a kilometer to the transport bay. They were close now. So close he could almost smell the promethium fumes from the evacuation ship's engines. But as he crept through the abandoned facility, checking corners and watching for signs of alien infiltration, Marcus began to notice something that made his blood run cold. Tracks. Gene Stealer cult tracks. Human footprints, but subtly wrong. The stride was too long, the weight distribution indicated in human musculature, and here and there he could see the telltale scrape marks of claws. This changed everything. Cultists retained human intelligence while gaining alien enhancements. They could use weapons, set traps, coordinate complex ambushes. Marcus crept back to the group and quietly briefed them on the new threat. The fear in their eyes deepened, but they listened to his instructions without panic. Stay together. Stay quiet. Trust his judgment completely. They moved through the water processing plant silently, using the massive machinery for cover as they navigated toward the eastern exit. The facility's emergency lighting cast strange shadows that seemed to move and writhe. Every sound made them freeze. Every shift in the chemical-tainted air made them hold their breath. They were halfway through the plant when the trap was sprung. It began with the lights going out. Every emergency strip, every backup illuminator, every flashing warning beacon went dark simultaneously. The facility was plunged into absolute blackness, and in that darkness, Marcus heard the sound he had been dreading. Human voices speaking in the chittering tongue of the Tyranid swarms. The cultists had been waiting for them. "Stay down," Marcus whispered urgently. "Don't move, don't make a sound." But it was already too late. The cultists had surrounded them in the darkness, moving with inhuman stealth through terrain they knew better than their prey. Marcus could hear them communicating in their alien tongue. The first shot came from directly ahead, the sharp crack of a stub pistol that sent a bullet whizzing past Marcus's ear. He dodged left, bringing his lasgun to bear and firing at the muzzle flash. His Lars bolt illuminated the facility for a split second, revealing twisted human faces with too many eyes and mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. Then the real battle began. Marcus had fought gangers and pirates, and even orc raiders during his service with the Guard. But this was different. The cultists moved like gene stealers, but thought like humans, combining alien reflexes with human cunning in ways that defied conventional tactics. They used the facility's layout against him, channeling his movements into kill zones while remaining hidden in the darkness. He fell back toward the civilians, using his muzzle flashes to navigate through the maze of processing equipment. A cultist leaped from the shadows, its hybrid claws reaching for his throat. Marcus put 3 Lars bolts center mass, the alien-tainted flesh sizzling as the energy beams burned through enhanced muscle and bone. Another cultist opened fire with an autogun, the bullets sparking off the metal machinery around Marcus's position. He returned fire, his Lars bolt taking the hybrid in the shoulder and spinning it around. But the creature kept coming, apparently immune to pain or shock. The battle raged through the processing plant's winding corridors and equipment bays. Marcus used every tactic he had, but the cultists adapted almost as quickly as he could implement them. They were learning, evolving, becoming more dangerous with each exchange of fire. Marcus realized they were herding him away from the group, just as he saw the first civilian fall. An elderly woman named Bethany, caught by cultist gunfire as she tried to reach cover behind a chemical storage tank. Her scream was cut short as alien claws opened her throat, and Marcus felt something break inside his chest. No more. He had lost too many people already. Marcus pulled the pin on his last frag grenade and hurled it into the darkness where the cultist muzzle flashes were clustered most thickly. The explosion lit up the facility like daylight, revealing the true scope of the threat they faced. There were dozens of them. Gene stealer cultists in various stages of hybrid development, from nearly human first-generation infiltrators to monstrous fourth-generation organisms that were more alien than human. They had been using the water processing plant as a staging area, preparing for their role in the final assault on the upper hive levels. And Marcus and his civilians had walked right into their nest. The grenade had killed several cultists and wounded others, but there were still too many of them. Marcus emptied his final power cell in a desperate bid to break through their encirclement, his Lars bolts dropping cultists left and right. But his weapon's power finally failed. A cultist patriarch emerged from the shadows, a bloated, obscene thing that had once been human, but now bore more resemblance to a gene stealer broodlord than anything that had ever walked upright. Its psychic presence pressed against Marcus's mind, trying to bend his will to its own purpose. Marcus resisted with every fiber of his being, clinging to his faith in the Emperor and his oath to protect the innocent. The psychic assault intensified, threatening to shatter his sanity, but he held firm. He was a guardsman of the Astra Militarum, and his soul belonged to the Golden Throne. The Patriarch shrieked in frustration and charged with inhuman speed. Marcus met its rush with his combat knife, the blade slicing through alien flesh and drawing fountains of purple ichor. But the creature's claws raked across his chest, opening his flak armor, adding to his collection of wounds. They fought in the darkness, human determination against alien hunger, and for a moment it seemed that Marcus might actually win. His knife found vital organs, severed nerve clusters, opened wounds that would have killed any natural creature. But the Patriarch was no longer natural. It was something far beyond human. It absorbed damage that should have been fatal and kept fighting with foul persistence. In the end, it was numbers that decided the battle. While Marcus struggled with the Patriarch, the surviving cultists closed in on the helpless civilians. He heard their screams, heard children calling his name, heard the wet sounds of claws tearing through human flesh. And in that moment of distraction, the Patriarch's claws found his throat. Marcus Varn felt his life flowing out through the ragged wounds in his neck, felt his strength ebbing. He fell to his knees, his vision blurring, his hands clutching uselessly at the mortal injuries that were killing him by degrees. But he was not dead yet, and as long as he drew breath, he had a duty to fulfill. With his last grenade clutched in trembling fingers, Marcus Varn smiled. The crack grenade was designed to destroy armored vehicles and fortified positions. In the confined space of the water processing plant, surrounded by chemical storage tanks and pressurized equipment, it would do far more than that. Marcus pulled the pin and held the grenade tight against his chest, counting down the seconds until detonation. Around him, the cultists realized what he was doing and scrambled to escape the blast radius. But there was nowhere to run in the cramped facility, nowhere to hide from the coming explosion. The Patriarch tried to flee, its alien intelligence finally recognizing the trap it had walked into. But Marcus grabbed the creature with his free hand, holding it close with the last of his failing strength. "For the Emperor," he whispered. The explosion lit up the underhive like a newborn star. The crack grenade's focus charge detonated the chemical storage tanks, which in turn ruptured the pressurized coolant lines, which triggered a cascade failure in the facility's containment systems. Within seconds, the entire water processing plant was consumed in a roiling fireball that incinerated everything within a 100-meter radius. Marcus Varn died as he had lived, a servant of the Imperium, faithful to his oath, protective of the innocent. His sacrifice eliminated the cultist nest and cleared the path to the transport bay for any other evacuation groups that might still be fighting their way through the underhive. But what of the civilians he had sworn to protect? When the explosion faded and the fires burned low, search teams from the PDF defensive perimeter ventured into the ruins of the water processing plant. They found evidence of a lone guardsman, a discarded Lars rifle along with other scraps of equipment. Around him lay the remains of dozens of gene-stealer cultists, their alien-tainted flesh reduced to ash and bone fragments. And in a sealed maintenance tunnel 100 meters away, they found something else. 35 survivors huddled together in terrified silence. Vera and her daughter Lyanna, Caius and the other elderly citizens, the wounded and the weak and the afraid. Marcus's sacrifice had saved them all. The survivors were loaded onto the last evacuation transport and lifted off into the ash-clouded sky. Below them, Kethara Prime burned in the light of alien bioships, its billions of citizens consumed by the endless hunger of the Hive Fleet. But 35 human souls had escaped that fate. 35 lives that would continue, because one guardsman had kept his oath.